Huh. So, assuming that my Modernia does 77 mil in a 30-second, my calculation right now with Trony is 73 M in 30 seconds. All right. Okay, so let's start talking about Trony just in general. Obviously, this is just paper matte and we don't fully know. So her skill basically revolves around this setup. When you first hit the enemy, it will have this like that monitor thing, and that basically will trigger the skill 1 effect for her, which is the Trony Bomber, and that will allow you to start accumulating damage whenever you shoot. So it's kind of like Dorothy. You see here there's a 7% because they hit once with a full charge, it shows up. You hit again, it shows 77%, and then when you hit the second time around, it became 17%. Unlike Dorothy, because Dorothy, you can get the accumulation based on from everybody else. This seems to be just coming from herself only. So only she will accumulate this damage. So let's talk about her skills just to kind of break it down a little bit. Everything else is kind of standard for her. She's attacker, sniper rifle, she's fire. The stats on her sniper rifle is the basic sniper rifle. Now, here's the thing about her skill 1, and just to kind of break it down a little bit more further. There will be that thing, right? This thing. After 5 seconds, I'm assuming that it's gonna explode and will damage the enemy. Or once you hit the maximum amount of damage, which is 1.5k caster's final attack, then it will also explode if you reach that before the 5 seconds. But here's the thing, it only is accumulated by her. Nobody else is accumulating it, and also only 50% of the damage is being accumulated. So it's not a full 100%, like how much you damage, like for Dorothy, how much you damage is how much you will add up to that number. Now, for her in particular, only 50%. So for Dorothy in particular, whenever you're bursting, this is how she works, right? When you burst with Dorothy, any hit that you do, it will be counted on this thing. So everyone's hitting and that will be counted. But see, the thing is, like, you can do it also, like your other units, but for her, only she will accumulate it. That's like the main caveat for this. And then another thing that, as I was doing some calculation, it seems like it's gonna be very hard for her to accumulate just within that 5 seconds. In fact, if you just try to do it on herself, only probably like, instead of 1.5k, you'll probably only do like 56% if you just do it on her own, if we're not like calculating any other buffs or anything. So there is definitely a necessity for like other buffers, but what kind of buffers, I'll talk about it in a little bit. Let me talk a little bit more about the additional things here. Now, the skill 2 is a distributed damage. Cumulative damage is defined here and differently from distributed damage. Not to confuse it with Dorothy's burst, which is like, there is accumulation of damage also here, and it is distributed damage, but there is no discerning of like cumulative damage with distributed damage. So I don't know if when she's coming out and she's gonna be patched, like they're gonna change the definition on Dorothy, or this is something that is moving on forward for Trony that's gonna be unique, or how they're gonna start defining it. But yeah, so the cumulative damage is how much is the container on that, right? So for Dorothy, and for example here, whenever I burst with Dorothy, it was going up to 17 mil or 23 mil, depending if I was bursting with Elegg. So here, let me show this to you. So if I burst with Dorothy with Elegg and Red Hood, it's gonna reach up to 23 mil right there on that bottom. That's for Dorothy, it shows as distributed damage. And so whenever Elegg is bursting, it will affect like the total amount of damage. But from this one in particular, it looks like the cumulative damage is separately calculated, and then once you're that cumulative damage is maxed out or after 5 seconds, then it will apply the distributed damage. Why are they trying to differentiate this? And the main reason for that is because just because it's distributed damage doesn't mean that it's accumulated damage, right? One example is Scarlet Black Shadow, where she has a distributed damage, and same with 2B also. 2B's burst is a distributed damage, but it's not accumulation. So they had to make that explicit, and it's two different things. What that means is increasing the skill 2 will not necessarily increase how much we need to accumulate on the cumulative damage. So if we get like 51%, so or 50%, for example, whenever we're triggering that skill 1, let's say I have like 200k attack and I put in 1.5k from the caster, it costs 3 mil. But then this is how I'm understanding this. It doesn't seem like we're gonna need, say, another 50%. So it doesn't seem like we're gonna need 4.5 mil damage to reach that. What we probably only need to hit 3 mil, and then once it hits 3 mil, it'll become 4.5 mil on the damage result. So that's kind of like how I'm understanding what's the relation of the cumulative damage and the distributed damage. What that will change also is because on her burst, the burst is increasing the cumulative damage ratio 50% only of whatever she damages into additional 62%. So how I'm understanding this is, let's say whenever you do a basic attack, let's say you do 345k damage whenever you do a basic attack. So what that means is, in order for me to max out this 1.5k, that means I need to shoot it 18 times full charge, because I'm only accumulating 50% of the damage that I do. However, if I try to burst, one thing, there's two things that this burst is gonna do. Increase the attack. What that means is, instead of 3 mil limit, that will also increase, but then also my basic attack will increase. So what that means is my new limit is gonna be, instead of 3 mil, it's gonna be 6 mil. Also, my basic attack is going from 345k on non-core and 690k on core shot. It's gonna go from that into 1 mil on a non-core shot and 1.8 mil on a core shot. But that will also, instead of just accumulating 50%, I'm gonna get 62% additional. So how I'm understanding it is, it's gonna be more often when we can trigger that skill 1. So now, instead of taking 18 shots on non-core or 9 shots on core to get that 1.5k limit, it only takes 5 shots on non-core and 3.15 shots on core. So that's how each of the skill is gonna start to synergize, and then on top of that, the skill 2 will add make the damage multiplier increase there. What does this all mean? Two things, right? Within 5 shots, just kind of on her own, it's very difficult to reach this limit of 1.5k. How it's gonna be? Within 5 seconds, with 5 shots, it's gonna take her about only 56% of the damage, because we're not really shooting that much. But what this also means is the buffers that she need aren't necessarily attack buffers, but other damage multiplier buffers. What you actually need is the other multipliers, which is like Crown or like Naga, which will increase the damage that she does, because that way you can trigger that skill 1 more often. Just to give an example, with Crown and Naga, what I did, I ended up needing only 3 full charge, as opposed whenever she's whenever actually anyone's bursting. If she's bursting, it only takes like 2 charges actually. And here's another thing, elemental damage will likely also affect heavily this, because this can make a difference of how often you can trigger this cumulative damage. Because for example, if I didn't have an elemental damage with Crown and Naga, it only takes like 3 full charge. But then if I say I had like 60% elemental damage, then it only takes 1.88 or 2 charges. So instead of 3 or 4 charges, it only takes 2 charges instead, because I had elemental damage, because she's dealing more damage on it and it will accumulate more damage, but then the limit of it is not increasing because it's only based on the final attack. What this means is, in terms of building her, there's a huge way more emphasis on like elemental damage, because it can make or break a breakpoint where you will actually you can trigger this skill 1 within 2 shots instead of 3 shots. That's like 33% faster, right? So there's like huge difference on like how to build her. And instead of like what people are thinking that's Elegg, I actually think that Blanc or Novel or Crown are Naga are much bigger buffs for her, because it will also help accumulating this skill 1 damage a lot faster. Because I don't think that Elegg's distributed damage will make this faster, unless somehow maybe makes a difference. That's something we can test once she's out. Like, unless it makes it 1.5 times faster or something, right? Like, because Elegg gives like 40% more distributed damage. I wonder if that's also gonna affect how much faster we're gonna do this. So that's something we're gonna have to figure out once she's released. The main thing that I was really trying to figure out was like, how much damage was she really gonna provide. I think with the full investment, she might be even with Modernia, and with the proper team, she might be that. And the reason why I compared her with Modernia also is because Modernia doesn't have pierce shots, unlike Alice, where there's pierce shots. So Alice has like a advantage on that. So that's something that I would like to figure out. But also, again, another thing is there's a lot of niche kind of building for her. And I don't like that she's using Crown, for example. But maybe Tia Naga would be fine too. But again, like, there's so many, it's so much demanded already, the Tia Naga. The way that I'm thinking also is because of how much better she is with Elemental, then it feels like it's weird, right? Because there's no Elemental that's saying here, there's nothing about Elemental. But with more Elemental, her skill 1 is more efficient, but without Elemental, I don't know how much more efficient it is gonna be. So yeah, we'll probably test it. I'm slightly interested on how she is gonna turn out. Yeah, like, I really tried to see because the more I tried to test things and change some numbers, I was like, why? It seems like it's bad, because before we can trigger that skill 1, as you can see, if she's not bursting, if she's not doing her burst, it takes like 9 to 18 shots, depending if the boss has core. So that's another thing, by the way. If the boss doesn't have core, we're gonna trigger the skill 1 a lot less, because we're doing less damage. So it's a lot more difficult to trigger that skill 1. So you want to use her on enemies that has core, so that you can trigger the skill 1 a lot more often. So like, enemies with core and enemies that is weak against fire feels like the right play to make the best use of her. Without the core, without being fire elemental advantage, I don't know how she will perform well. So it's pretty interesting that you wouldn't really have expected it, because none of her skills talk about core, none of her skills talk about like, oh yeah, you should go with fire advantage. But because of how her skills work, and if you want to take advantage of how to trigger her skill 1 a lot more often, you might need those conditions to make the best use of her. And yeah, again, it's kind of difficult to use her on campaign, because you have to hit the bob, and then you're gonna do distributed damage. And typically it's just better to have Pierce, like AoE, and you want to be fast charging also. So it's just difficult to use her. Here's one thing I want to preface. Majority of the meta units have been limited and pilgrim. So her not being limited or pilgrim just feels like she will get power crept anyway. And that's another thing too. DPS just, I mean, she's just a raw DPS. So it's just hard to like use her because there's always like possibly a better DPS. So the main use that I can see her is Solar Raid because of this, right? This is just a bossing unit, Solar Raid, fire advantage, and when we start want to do it, maybe you start want to build 2B with her because distributed damage. So I just can't find a reason right now. Although she might look great, she's also, you know, she's not like surpassing Modernia in that great sense. So I just want to put the disclaimer that the calculations that I did are just like paper math, and there's possibly like I could be completely off on these because there's some things that I did assume on this unit when I was like doing the calculation. But yeah, I'll probably test her with a relatively small investment. She might not be worth investing. And again, another thing is like summer units are coming out. You don't want to miss out on another broken unit. And from what it looks like, they have been really pushing hard on making some of the limited units really good. If you look at it, how many are actually meta limited units? Summer Anise, Winter Ludmilla, and then pilgrims, how many are actually we're using? You have Snow White, you have Red Hood, you have Modernia, and you have Dorothy. There's just so many things that are, and then the duos also. So it's just like whenever they release just a basic character, it's hard to think that she would be like the best right now. So I'm like being very cautious on this character. In any case, once she's out, we'll do some testing as usual. Oh god, rip my resources again. Oh god. Anyways, chat. Yeah, that's it. We'll see.